Hello and welcome to another episode of the Big Daddy D Reviews, and I was very pleased with the response that my previous He-Man video received, and I have a number of ideas already now in place for future Masters of the Universe related content that I'll feature on this channel. One particular talking point in the comment section for my previous video was how the new series had been implemented, Revelation. Now I felt that the new cartoon was a bold, fresh narrative that also played out like a visual toy checklist from yesteryear. Hello there, Wonder and Hero. The cartoon isn't perfect, but the story hasn't been finished yet, and I feel that some of the bad reception that it's received already has been rather unjustified. So in the interest of fairness, for this video I am going to talk about Masters of the Universe Revelation, and I'm going to highlight some of the issues where it went wrong, but I will also talk about what went right for the show. Let's take a look. First of all, what went wrong? Well, the marketing. People felt that Kevin Smith had lied to them. The fact that He-Man and Skeletor were featured prominently in the marketing for this show, and still are at the moment. I mean, if you look at the cover artwork and the thumbnails for the show, it is still He-Man and Skeletor that are featured prominently, whilst Teela is depicted as a much smaller character. And anyone who has seen Revelation by now would know that she is essentially the main character in this. If there had been some honesty, and it had been marketed from the beginning that this is Teela's story, then maybe we wouldn't have had such a strong negative reaction. People felt cheated. They felt it was a bait and switch tactic, that Kevin Smith had deliberately been dishonest with them. Smith did say that Teela would be given more to do in Revelation than what she did in the Filmation series, but this was really an understatement. Again, she's essentially the main character in the show, and they should have been more open and honest and said that from the start. This also issues the second biggest problem with the show. Not only was it a little dishonest over who the main character was, but it also turns out that this main character wasn't particularly likeable at times. This brings us to the second issue of what went wrong, and that is Teela. The problem wasn't removing He-Man, but depicting Teela in the way that they did. Now, it's understandable that Teela has had a lot to deal with. People deal with grief in different ways. Randor dealt with his grief in anger, stripping Man-at-Arms of his title, a man who he has known for years and fought alongside with. He also banished him from the kingdom under threat of being executed. Now, Teela's had to cope with the fact that her best friend, Adam, had died, and that someone that she potentially had romantic feelings for, He-Man, has also died. Oh, and the fact that these two people were actually the same person all along, and the fact that people that she knew and loved, her own father included, knew about this and had lied to her all these years. However, Teela being mad about being left out of a secret is one thing, but entirely renouncing her position in the kingdom over it, and berating everyone in the throne room, including, might I ask, grieving parents who have only just found out that their son has died, but berating them over this secret is something else entirely. The writing for this character should have been a lot better, and that's something that could have been fixed with a quick tweak, like Teela feeling that her father being exiled for failing to protect Adam was completely unjustified. I mean, Randor orders Teela to escort her own father out of the kingdom. Would you help the king punish your own parents? Where would your loyalty lay with? With your king? Or the only parents you've ever known? But all that Teela was focused on was how everyone lied to her, because they knew something that she didn't. The injustice that her father was facing, including being stripped of his title and banished from the kingdom with the threat of execution if he ever stepped foot in it again, never seemed to cross her mind. It was all about how she was betrayed, how everyone lied to her. Now again, this part could and should have been written better. It certainly didn't set Teela off on the right foot for this new series, and a lot of anger for the series has been directed at the way that Teela was depicted. And it probably doesn't help that, again, on top of that, they haven't marketed clearly enough that Teela's the main character for this show. Now again, a lot of that anger from so-called He-Man fans has been completely unjustified. Some of these YouTube channels that have put out negative videos about the show just seem like the people behind those channels had already decided, had already predetermined that they were going to be mad at the show before they even watched it. Now if that is the case, why would you put yourself through watching that show to begin with? Just give it a wide berth. I'll give you an example. When I saw the trailer for Thundercats Raw, oh god, straight away I decided that this wasn't the show for me. As someone who enjoyed the original series in the 80s and then the reboot that came a few years later, I looked at Thundercats Raw and thought, no, this definitely isn't for me. Did I watch it anyway so that I could then have an angry rant about it on YouTube? Well, no. I just decided not to watch it at all. But it seems that some people just wanted something to dislike and rage about because that's what's going to draw people to their YouTube channels. Because they've all run out of negative things to say about the likes of Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, or any other number of science fiction franchises of the last few years that have dared to put a female character in as a more prominent figure. Oh no, we got tricked into watching a show about a strong woman. Let's have an angry rant about it on the internet. Again, the way that the show was marketed and the way that Teela was written as a character could have been done so much better. It would have certainly prevented in receiving such a strong negative reaction to the show. Okay, so that's the bad stuff out of the way. Let's focus on something a little more positive now to finish off this video, in what went right. So the first bit are Easter eggs and references galore. As mentioned at the start of this video, Revelation played out like a visual toy line wish list, with numerous characters from across the lore of Masters of the Universe making appearances throughout the course of Revelation. Revelation even went as far as to make several references to the 1987 live-action movie. In the very first episode of Revelation, as He-Man and Skeletor are about to fight, Skeletor declares that, "Let this be our final battle," which is a line that he said in the film before their final showdown. In later episodes, the Sorceress of Grayskull was aging rapidly as her powers grew weaker. This was something else that also occurred in the movie, as Skeletor was slowly draining the power of Grayskull from her over the course of the film until he became a literal god. And yes, that also happened in Revelation as well. Oh, and when Adam and Teela are on those flying discs during the wild hunt in Preternia, those look virtually identical to the ones used in, again, the live-action Masters of the Universe movie. But the Easter eggs aren't just related to the 1987 film. They are several homages to the original toy line and the 80s cartoon from Filmation. For example, the introduction sequence for Revelation references the classic toy posters that featured the original action figure line, which was an excellent nostalgic moment, especially for people like me that grew up on He-Man and had these posters on their bedroom wall. In the first episode of Revelation, Skeletor uses a recognisable item from the second episode of the classic 80s series. He clearly has the Shaping Staff, which is what he uses to disguise himself and Evil Lyn. And in a great note to detail, the Shaping Staff is half the length in size that it was in the 80s episode, as at the end of that episode, He-Man had snapped it in two. And in that very same episode, the Shaping Staff, Skeletor had also created a robotic duplicate He-Man called Faker to trick the Sorceress. And guess what? He does exactly the same thing here as well. And there are further references to the Shaping Staff episode later on in Revelation, when Evil Lyn uses the name Majestra whilst disguising herself as an old woman to secure Teela's help. Evil Lyn had previously used that same alias in the Shaping Staff episode to disguise herself when she was infiltrating the royal palace. In another great homage, the faker He-Man is riding around on the robot horse Stridor, which was one of the vehicles from the original toy line. But when the spell is undone, it turns out it's not Stridor, it's Night Stalker instead, which essentially was the same toy, but it was a different colour for the baddies. In fact, Stridor came packaged with the character Fisto, whilst Night Stalker came packaged with the character Jitsu, who was basically exactly the same as Fisto, only he was a baddie and he had a chopping action rather than a punching action. And speaking of Fisto, one of my favourite characters from the original series, he's seen run into battle alongside Teela and Clampchamp. Now, Fisto had been in the cartoons before, both in the 80s series and the 2000X series, but this would be the first time that Clampchamp was featured, probably because he was a late addition to the toy line, like Scareglow was. More on him in a moment. And it's not just Stridor and Night Stalker either. There are several other vehicles from the original series and toy line featured in Revelation, including the Landshark and the Bashosaurus, which are two vehicles that I had as a child. There's also the Sky Sled and the Roton. And add to that a saber-toothed version of Skeletor's own feline steed Panther can be seen in the Forest of Forever, acting as the prey of the Wild Hunt for the hero's hunting trip, with King Grayskull himself riding a dinosaur that resembles the heroic Bionatops from the toy line. Little lines in the dialogue here and there also act as Easter eggs. Queen Marlena comments that Teela looks like a warrior goddess, which is a reference to the packaging on her action figure in the 80s. Castle Grayskull itself being a magical construct to hide the Hall of Wisdom, the true source of all magical power in Eternia, was an idea that was first created for the 2000X Masters of the Universe series, with He-Man's power sword being the key to unlock the Hall of Wisdom, being a nod to the early days of the original toy line, where the sword acted as the key to unlock the drawbridge of Castle Grayskull. Another bit of classic lore from the early toy line was that two blades had to be combined to form He-Man's power sword, with He-Man having one half and Skeletor the other. Revelation expands upon this idea somewhat by tying the two sword halves to the realms of Preternia and Subternia. Now, Preternia was originally created to be the setting of a unproduced Masters of the Universe spin-off, The Powers of Grayskull, which would have centred around an ancestor of He-Man named Hero, and the prehistoric version of Eternia that he protected. Revelation changes this lore a little and essentially makes this into the Eternian version of Valhalla, where noble heroes from Eternia's past, including Hero and King Grayskull, enjoy an eternity of feasting and hunting. The Eternia playset that was, again, a late addition to the toy line, also features within Preternia as well. And as for Subternia, this essentially acts as Eternia's version of Hades, of Hell, of the Underworld. It is also the realm of Scareglow, another character that, again, didn't come into the toy line until much later, and so therefore never appeared in any of the episodes of the original series. Now, Tony Todd provides the voice of Scareglow, and he does an absolutely amazing performance, and he is clearly enjoying himself whilst recording his lines for this character. He is clearly relishing every single moment of voicing this character, and it's a genuine joy to listen to. It's definitely one of the highlights of Revelation Part 1, without a doubt. This brings us nicely on to the second part of what went right with Revelation, and that would be the dramatic storytelling. Masters of the Universe is, at its core, a mishmash of several different science fiction and fantasy stories that were all thrown into a cooking pot by Mattel back in the 80s to create something that children would enjoy. The television show and the toy line are essentially a combination of Star Wars, because that was still popular at the time, and Conan the Barbarian, with some elements of Flash Gordon thrown in there, John Carter of Mars, Superman, all kinds of things. Possibly because as a result of this, between the toy line and the comics and the cartoon, Masters of the Universe never really had a single cohesive storyline or mythos going about it. The early mini-comics that you got with the action figures were not necessarily in the same continuity of the Filmation show. The comic book series that the likes of Marvel and then later DC put out were not necessarily in the same continuity of each other. And then as for the movie from the Canon Film Group, well, I mean, that could be its own category entirely. Let's not even get started on the new adventures of He-Man. Oof. But what Revelation attempts to do is to take aspects from different parts of the lore of Masters of the Universe, whether it's the comics, the toys, the cartoons, the movie, etc., and tries to combine all of these together into one compelling narrative. Following the first episode, the shocking first episode, the rest of the series of Revelation becomes essentially like a Lord of the Rings style quest, where characters from both sides either work together or against each other to try and restore the magic that has been lost from Eternia. It's a plot narrative that's been used before, and it works. The sight of the Sorceress of Grayskull and Evil Lyn putting their differences aside to work together speaks volumes, because if they don't, then the entire planet is doomed. I felt that it was pitched really well. I mean, what happens when He-Man and Skeletor are dead? What happens to the others? The fact that He-Man's mother, Queen Marlena, also knew about his secret identity was also done really well, I felt. Plus, it fleshed out the other characters that the original series never did. It was a bold storytelling choice to remove these two key characters after the first episode, and then seeing how the rest of the characters coped not only with the loss, but with the situation of, right, we now need to save Eternia. And I mean, of course, it's not really a surprise that they find out a way to bring back both Adam and Skeletor back into the proceedings before the end of part 1. And for those who say, oh, well, it's a He-Man cartoon without He-Man, he does appear in all 5 episodes. Whether it's He-Man there himself, or whether it's a flashback, or whether it's a vision that Scareglows come up with in Subternia. Whether you like it or not, He-Man does appear in all 5 episodes of this series. So for people to turn around and say it's a He-Man show without He-Man, well, that's complete and utter nonsense. Of course, some of the best stories from the original series would be where the all-powerful He-Man character was sidelined, and someone else would have to save the day. Whether that was Adam, or Teela, or Orko, or some other character. He-Man essentially has the same problem as Superman, in which he is such a powerful hero that there really doesn't seem to be any stage where it looks like the good guys will lose, unless something dramatic happens that will take that character out of the story altogether. Now, a great example of this was the episode I mentioned in my previous He-Man video, the one that I suggested would be the true final episode of the Filmation series, and that would be The Problem with Power, where He-Man is tricked into believing that he's accidentally killed an innocent person, and so decides to give up the powers of Grayskull. Another example is where someone like Teela is the main focus of the story, where we have the, at the moment, still unresolved matter where she is the daughter of the Sorceress of Grayskull, and will likely take her place as Grayskull's guardian one day. This makes for a better story, and you save the inevitable big battle for the very end of the series, which we will no doubt get when part 2 comes along. And again, this is just the first part of a 2-part story. There's another set of 5 episodes to come. How can people judge it so badly when the story isn't even finished? Wait until the story is finished first before you start sharpening those knives. It's not perfect. There's a few elements that I thought could and should have been better, as I've outlined in this very video. But at this point, it's a new Masters of the Universe cartoon. And considering what we've had to just deal with over the last 18 months, the fact that we've got another sort of harmless form of escapism, we've got another harmless form of entertainment, and something that harkens us back to our childhood and to simpler times. I don't know about you, but what could possibly be wrong with that? What could possibly be wrong with that? Anyway, that's the end of another analysis / rant on He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Thank you to everyone that took the time to watch and comment on my previous He-Man related video, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this new video, just as much. If you have, then please do leave a like and a comment, on this video, and please also consider sharing this across your various social media gubbins, in particular with anything that's related to He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and why not subscribe to the channel as well while you're at it in order to see my other videos. But for now, thank you very much for stopping by the Big Daddy D Reviews channel, and we'll catch you again next time.